Okay, hiya. Just let me know if you can hear. Ooh, what's going on? Ooh, I had this problem before. One. That's better. No, it's not. One. Ah, are you hearing an echo there? Oh, that's good. No, because I can hear it here. It's insane on me headphones, so that's great as long as there's no echo. Ah, that's brilliant. Okay, so hi Dave, Paul, Justin, John, David again. How's it doing? And Robert, how's it going? Ah, that's brilliant. Right. So that was a bit of a freaky little start there. So what do we have? Right. What I wanted to go over tonight was contrast. There's a billion different ways of doing it, but a lot of the time when you do contrast, what happens is you end up with a color shift in your image. I'll go over a couple of different ways that you can do contrast, but I'll end up showing you probably one of the better ways to do it, if not the best way to do it. And so we'll get it's clipping. Okay. Thanks, Paul. Give me 1 second. Is that better, Paul? Is that better, Paul? Ah, okay. What the? One, one, two. Is there any echo now, Paul? What is crackling? Give me 1 second, folks. One, 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 two. That is kind of iffy. Sorry about the sound here for a minute, folks. Okay. And how about now? Okay. Yeah, because I don't want the audio to be bad on this. And a lot of crackling and stuff like that. So Is it back? Okay. That's really weird now because there's an echo on my side now and it's really annoying the hell out of me. Um, so output. Okay, the audio's back there now. Should be anyway. Right, hang on. One, 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 one. Oh yes. Desktop audio. Desktop audio. Mic audio. Webcam. Okay. That is so annoying. Okay. Right. Hopefully, yeah, I have to. I was doing something there during the week trying to get the. That's funky. I was doing something there during the week trying to get a video to play. Whatever I did, it's after messing up the settings in OBS, so I'm going to have to probably redo a bit of stuff and do a few tests and stuff like that. Anyway, so sorry about all that messing at the start. So you can hear, yeah, there's no problem. Okay, sorry. Thanks. How are you, Ruben? How's it going now? Um, now, so what I was saying was contrast. Okay, so if we take this image here, it's just a raw image I took a couple of nearly 2 years ago at this stage. Uh, um, I'm just going to open it up in Camera Raw. So the general consensus being people like to put contrast on stuff in Camera Raw or Lightroom and then work on it in Photoshop and whatever. But if I just open that image up as it is, and then I go back to Camera Raw, open up another image, the same one, so I'm doing it twice this time. But this time I'm going to put on some contrast in Camera Raw, okay? Because people seem to like to use Camera Raw for contrast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my cursor into the contrast section and go shift up 4 times. Put a tiny bit of contrast in, okay? And then just open it up. So technically there's 40 plus 40 contrast in that image. So if I tile the two of these together now, right? A couple of weeks ago, well, 3 or 4 episodes ago, we went through keyboard shortcuts where you can actually set up. If you got the window and a range, I have tile all vertically set up as Alt Shift Control and V, or on a Mac it will be Option Shift Command V, and I also have Match All set up as Alt Shift Control and M, or on a Mac it's Option Shift Command M. Okay, so if I just hit all the Option Alt Shift keys on my keyboard and hit V and then follow it by M, it very handily does this and puts them two up for me. Okay, so with the Move tool selected, which is in the top corner of the tools palette, or if you can't, if the Move tool is not selected, if you hit V for verbatim on the keyboard, it selects the Move tool. So you can actually use keyboard shortcuts to move around. So if I want to zoom in, There's a bit of lag on that there now, fellas. I'm just having a look here. Yeah, no, it's still like. If I want to zoom in, it's probably Saturday night and everyone's hammered the internet. At the minute, there's only the move tool selected. If I hold down the space bar, you get the hand tool. Okay? And if I hold down the control key or command key on a Mac, I get the zoom tool. Now, the zoom tool at the minute is on plus. That's because if you go to the zoom tool by hitting Z on the keyboard, in the top corner, the zoom tool, the plus is selected, okay? If the minus was selected, it would it'd be minus by default, okay? I usually leave it on plus, okay? So going back to the move tool by hitting V on the keyboard. So we have our move tool. So control or command space gives you the zoom tool, okay? Now here's a little tip. If you hold down the shift key at the same time, so shift, control and space on a PC or shift command space on a Mac, and if I click on the image, it zooms them in exactly the same amount, okay? And if I also let go of the control or command key, I have the hand tool now because I have space down. So if I hold space and shift down, I can left click on one of them and it moves both of them up at the same time. So this is really handy for I'm just going to move me just ever so slightly up so you can see that's at 100% on both images, okay? But hopefully you can see that the image on, you can just about see it, the image on the right hand side, this one here, that's the one we put the contrast on in Camera Raw, okay? The problem is it's more saturated than the other images. We've just added a lot of saturation into the image. Like if I was to go down and look at that section there, there's way too much red in that image. See it? So if you're going from the right hand one, which is the one we did in Camera Raw, to the left hand one, which is the original raw file, I much rather not put any contrast on in Camera Raw or sharpening, because for the simple reason that when you put contrast in Camera Raw, it causes a color shift. And the same thing will happen with a person then. If you put contrast on in Camera Raw, if the red is going to change here, the skin is going to change and the person's face is going to get all orange and Oompa Loompa, okay? They'll be like there's too much tan on them, you know. So it's just to show, it was just to show you that the one on the left is the Camera Raw file, but the one on the right was the Camera Raw file that I put some contrast in Camera Raw. And there's an inherent problem with that, because when you put contrast on it in Camera Raw, you cannot stop the color shift. All right. So if any questions on that, give me a shout. Can't understand why that's doing that echo now, but it's hopefully it's not bad online now. I'll have to check it later on. It could be just an internal thing in my computer here. So so basically now what we'll do is we'll close down the two of those and go back to Camera Raw, and this time we'll open it 3 times. Okay, so we'll open it once. It increases saturation, Paul, because Camera Raw, I'll just go back to it now for a second, right? Here, Camera Raw has absolutely no control. When you put contrast on it, if I put that contrast up, if I zoom that in, right, and I put that contrast up to 60, right? If I hit P on the keyboard, it kind of gives me a preview before and after. So that's before and that's after. Okay, before and after. So there's a lot of saturation after going into the image, because you can't, that contrast slider is inherently flawed. You can't use it to put in contrast without having a color shift happen. So that's why I'd always just bring it in dead. 90% of the time everything's on 0. Now this is the new version 5. If you go over to the calibration tab, this is the new version 5. I'm not going back down to 2 for a few minutes to show you stuff later on, but that's just leaving it on that and just putting the contrast up. It has that inherent saturation. Like if I put another 20 in there and I do before and after, it's insane. Like you saturated the image, and the problem with that is you're saturating it in Camera Raw, but when you bring it into Photoshop, then it's baked in, and you have to try and get rid of it or fix it. So I'd rather, it's harder to fix something after you do it wrong, instead of fixing it as you go along and not allowing it to actually cause a problem in the first place. All right. So does that explain that, Paul? So keep it flat. Yeah, yeah. For me, it is anyway. Yeah. And also, you have to be very careful on that second tab. The contrast, right? Sometimes, 90% of the time, it will have a medium contrast on the image. That's the default way Photoshop wants to bring it in, is with a medium contrast. Problem with that is it changes the color as well. You know what I mean? So you have to be very careful. So I'm just going to reset it for a second. So this inside the tone, so I'm just checking that everything. This is kind of the default way it comes in. Yeah, that's the default way it comes into Photoshop, right? But the problem is that's not as flat as I wanted. I want no contrast to happen inside the Camera Raw. So I'd be going into sorry, there's the default there. I'd be going into the tone curve and making sure that the point one, the curve is linear, and you'll see the difference now when I click on it compared to medium contrast. The medium contrast one has saturated the image because you're pulling down the image in the shadows, and you're also pushing up the image, and Camera Raw does not have the ability to actually do it on a luminosity level. It does it to luminosity and the color as well. It just doesn't. It hasn't got the checkbox. It would be lovely if it did, but it doesn't, because then you wouldn't have to do this bit in Photoshop. So make sure it says linear here. Okay. So so yeah, keep it flat, Paul. So any other questions on that, Paul? So I've got one image in, so I just duplicate it 3 times. Okay. So I have a keyboard shortcut, but basically it's down to, if you go image, duplicate. I've set it up in, if you go back through the videos, you'll see how you can set up your keyboard shortcuts, and I used Alt Shift Control and D for duplicate. Or on a Mac it's Option Shift Command and D. So I can very, very quickly just duplicate things. Instead of having to go up to the menu now, I can just hit D and call it that, and hit D again and call it that. Now I have my 3 sets, and if I hit Alt Shift Control and V again, it tiles them all vertically, and Alt Shift Control M matches them all. And what matching does is, if I have, say I have that one zoomed in a bit, and I want them all to match that, Alt Shift Control M matches all windows for the zoom and the position. Okay, so, and holding, when I'm moving one window around and I want them all to move around, whatever I'm doing, all you have to do is hold the Shift key down. So if you've got the hand tool selected, just hold Shift down, and it will automatically mean that when you move one window, the other ones move. Okay. You can reduce it afterwards to compensate, but that's kind of like saying, David, can I get out of a speeding ticket after I've got it? Yes, you can, but you need a very, very expensive, high-priced lawyer, which will cost you money. So basically, you're better off not letting the oversaturation happen to start with, because then you have to use the really bad saturation tools inside of Photoshop to get rid of it. You know what I mean? So the one on the left is always going to be our original, right? and the next two then will be the changes. So, and I'm only using this image for a start image, okay? So that's roughly, it's at 50% there, but it'll give us an idea because we're looking at the reds and the greens, okay? So, yeah. So, go over to the second image. Now, what am my head here, right? Yeah. So, usually inside Photoshop, it's never ever go up to image adjustments. Any of those. Don't use any of them tools there. They will bake it in on a layer. In other words, they will destructively destroy the pixels. Sometimes you need to do that, but 90% of the time you want to be able to have the options not to. So I'd never go into the adjustments layers up there. I'd always go to the layers palette. And if you can't see the layers palette, hit F7 on the keyboard or go to window and down to layers. Okay, and that'll show it for you. So with the background layer selected, if you click on the adjustment layer there, it's like a half black, half white circle. If you click on that, you'll get a bunch of options. And we can add a curve, okay? Right? And that brings up the curves dialog box. Now, this is why you have to be very careful how you use this tool, because you can actually add severe compression to your images. I'm just going to go back and get a what do you call it? Here we go. I'm just going to open this for a second so you can understand. Okay. Now, so I just get the Wacom tablet. Okay. I had a hard drive go wonky on me, so I had to more or less dismantle the computer, and so some of the cables aren't plugged in. So now there we go. So if you can imagine this, that's the highlight area here. So I'm just going to B. So that's the highlight and that's the shadows, right? Now, the only part of that image where the contrast doesn't add a color or a compression more so than a color shift, but the only part, if you can imagine that's the detail and it equally goes that way, the only part that's actually lifelike to what the camera captures is this section in the middle, because it's a 45-degree line. If you can imagine that as a set of steps going up the stairs, if you go across 9 inches and go up 9 inches and then across again 9 inches, it's a 45-degree angle. So that bit in the middle there, that's the only bit that actually is like for like what you're seeing on the camera. And camera manufacturers, this is the raw files, camera manufacturers actually embed this compression in the highlights. That's a compression there where the bends down and it compresses the highlights here, and they put an even bigger compression in the shadows up here. The ideal thing would be if you kind of had a more or less a line that went kind of from here all the way up. That's the ideal thing. Is you know what I mean? That would be a beneficial thing, but obviously you'd have to have it going at a 45-degree angle. You know, so if you can imagine and understand that basically the camera manufacturers are embedding this contrast, because if I had the contrast that I wanted in my raw file, it would be super flat. There'd be more dynamic range in the images, and all I have to do is just bring it into Photoshop and get the detail out of it. But camera manufacturers won't bake that into the camera, because people would see the image and say it's rubbish, and even see the raw file and be scared of it, and that's why they have this compression that happens in the shadows and the compression in the highlights. Okay, so any questions on that before we move on? Okay, so if we get back to this, right, So we have our curves layer, okay? And I've seen people do this. You just grab it out and push it out like this, or pull it back in like that. But it's 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 if you want to make money out of photography and you don't want to be sitting in front of your computer wanging slide bars all day and wanging curves around all day, you have to have some sort of repeatability in your images, right? And doing this either side of that, it's when you do that, that's putting a curve down here in the shadows, and it's putting a bend in the highlights as well. So you're compressing. So if I was to bring that down, the minute that hits there, everything from that point to there is now it's there's nothing left. It's 255. It's black. It's compressed to hell. Okay, so that's why I'm saying about that compression when you push down the curve, and the same up the highlights. If I was to push the highlights up to there, everything from 75% across would be blown out. Okay, so that's what I can't like. It's just pulling it up this way, pulling it down this way. It just for me, it's just like banging my head against the wall, right? And the other thing is curves by default. You see, it doesn't give you an easy way. If I put the point in the middle there, right? It's working on 120. It's in the wrong mode basically. It's a hundred. It goes from 0 to 255. Okay. It's a percentage. It's not a percentage thing, which is easy to figure out and easy to use. It's 0 to 255, a half of 25 or 256, because 0 is actually counted as one of the data points. So you have 256 data points. Half it's 128, half of 128 is 64, and then the other one is 192. But then when you try to get into the percentages in the middle of it, you know, I mean, it's too much work basically for me. So basically, I always do this with the curve. If you go into the flyout menu inside the properties box in your curve and just choose curve display options, right? You'll see this option that's set to light, right? If you set it to pigment ink percentage instead, now it's that center point is 50-50. Okay, so if I was to click in the output there and go shift and up, I've now put in a 10% curve. Or if I go shift and down, I've put in a 10% curve the other way. So holding down the up and down keys in this dialog box will only move up and down by 1 at a time, and you press the shift key down and it multiplies everything by a factor of 10. It happens in all programs, in Microsoft programs as well, and Photoshop as well. When you hold down shift, whatever the default movement of the item is, it will multiply it by 10. Okay, so by holding down shift then and going up, what you're actually doing is, because the curve is now backwards, right? If I just turn the visibility on, you'll see it. Click into the output and hold shift and up. Okay, it's putting shadow into it, because what we're doing now is it goes from light to dark. So the more ink that's on the page, so the higher up that curve, the more ink the more density is on the thing, you know what I mean? And the lower down it is, the less density. Okay, so if you take that point then, and if we look at this as your usual thing where people would just add a medium contrast to it, that's an S curve. Everyone's heard of an S curve, okay? The problem with S curves is you can probably already see it. It's actually already added a color cast to the image, and that's a very, very, very small curve. It's not a major curve, okay? Audio still okay and all, yeah? It's not clicking or anything like that. It's not going bananas, no? I'm just going to reload the page here just to make sure. I'd say everyone and their mammies are on the internet tonight, so it's probably a little bit glitchy. Right. So, yeah. So basically, if I zoom in on this one and hold down, see the way I zoomed in, I forgot to hold down the shift key. Now that's at a different zoom and a different position than the other two windows. So you could go window, arrange, and match all, or I have, as I was saying at the start of the video, Alt Shift Control M, okay, for match all. And you can see, I can even see on the screen there, that lighthouse here in the middle is more saturated than the one on the left, okay, and that was an incredibly small curve. That wasn't a major push in a curve or anything like that. It was incredibly small. And if I bring that from medium and increase the contrast, it gets even worse. You know? And if that's on a person's face, you'll see it. And that's where it's critical. You might be able to get away with it on the likes of this, but if you even look at the boat in the bottom, I'm just going to move myself up here for a few minutes. Right. If you look at the boat in the bottom, the boat on the left hand side is the proper color, and the boat in the middle then has got this cast on it because it's been saturated. And you can actually see, remember what I was talking about, the compression? If you look at the bottom of that curve there, right there, it's compressed to hell in the highlights, and it's also pulling a compression curve in the shadows. Okay, whenever you get that curve that comes down like that, that's compression to shadows, and that's a compression in the highlights. The only part that's not compressed within reason is the little bit in the middle, and it's near to 45, so that little bit in the middle is not as compressed as the rest of it is, but there's a high amount of compression going on in the shadows and a high amount of compression going on in the highlights. Okay, so because we flipped the curve around, everything is backwards for the minute, but it's much easier to use this way. It still works, but it's just much easier to use. Okay, so if you don't want to do anything else other than fix the fact that when I put the contrast on the one in the middle, the saturation goes to heck. If you don't want to actually do anything else other than fix that, if you change the blend mode of that layer, the curves layer that's there, from normal down to luminosity, what will happen is it won't saturate the image as much because it's only putting the contrast in and the red hasn't changed. Okay, so if I was to copy that to that by just dragging the layer onto it, and I go back to the middle one and change that to normal. So the one in the middle is the one that got super saturated. The one on the right hand side now, I've told it to be luminosity as the blend mode. So the saturation isn't there. It's more matching the first one, just with more contrast. The one in the middle is the one that got super saturated, okay? Any questions on that? So, just give me 1 sec there. Right. That's grand. So by changing the blend mode of the curves layer to luminosity, it gets rid of the color shift. Now it's not the best way to do it, but it gets rid of the color shift that's in the image, because the luminosity layer, the luminosity blend mode, it only allows the brightness values, the luminance values in the layer to be what's affected. It ignores the color values. Okay, so any color shift in the image gets dumped and ignored, and it only allows the brightness values or the contrast to be put on the image without it allowing the color shift that happened in the middle one to be put on the image. Okay, so if we take it a step further then, right, and we just dump that one, go back to the middle and dump that one. So basically we're back to 3 images. They're all exactly the same. Okay, so first image again is going to be our reference image. Second one, now what we're going to do now is we're going to think of it slightly better as regards contrast, right? And instead of just using the defaults that they give you, right? So if we choose a curves layer, and because we now can click, say if we click a point there, and make it 75, 75. And we click a point down here and make it 25, 25. Okay. So now what we have is 2 points on the curve that we can actually put in figures and control the amount of contrast that's in the image, rather than just accepting the default one that Photoshop had, which was way off, and giving us the ability to put the contrast we want on at a repeatable amount every single time, and not have to just wang a slide bar till it looks good. All right. So if we go down to the one we're on and go into the output section, if we move that down, you see the curve's going down. So if we move it down 5 points, okay, and if we go into the shadow one up here and go into the output and go from 75 up to 80, okay. So now what we've done is, if we turn the layer on and off, we've added some contrast, but it's a set amount of contrast, and the color shift isn't as bad. Okay, it's not as bad as the original one, because what we're doing is we're not allowing the curve to be flattened as much in the shadows or flattened as much in the highlights. It's more of a straight curve. Okay, and that's a 5% shift up and down. Okay, so if we leave that one there in the middle and we just grab that curves layer and dump it on the end one, and then change the end one to luminosity. All right. So now what we've got now, and just looking at the live feed there, is your last one is still better than the middle one, and it gives you kind of a repeatable set that you can just pop in your contrast. Okay. But there's no color shift because I've changed it to luminosity. All right. So by changing the blend mode to luminosity, it only, as I was saying before, it only affects the luminance values of the curve. The curve only gets a chance to do the brightness. It doesn't actually do the color. Okay, so it won't affect the color. So, any questions on that before we move on? Okay, so we're going to get rid of them again. And we're actually going to go to a different image, okay? Actually, no, we might, give me 1 second. We might stay on the same image. Actually, we'll go to a different image. So I'm just going to close them all without saving anything. And I'm going to open up this image, okay? And we'll do 3 copies of this, okay? And you'll see why the... Yes, you can, Justin, yeah. I'll show you that now in a second. So your image is there. I'm going to accept everything. It's fine the way it is. I don't want to mess with that in Photoshop inside a bridge this time, inside a camera raw this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just duplicate the images. So I'm going to just bring me back down here a bit, just for a minute. So yet again, I have a shortcut for this, but if you go image duplicate, you can add the shortcut Alt Shift Control D. All right. So if I click on Alt Shift Control D, hit enter, Alt Shift Control D, hit enter. I now have 3 copies. Alt Shift Control V, Alt Shift Control M. Okay. So now they're set up for me. Okay. So if I was to get the zoom tool and hold down the shift key with the zoom tool selected, it moves them all up at the same time. And with the zoom tool selected, if I hold down the space key, I get the move tool, so I can move it up a little bit. Now you see the way I forgot to hold down the shift key? It's only moving that one at a time. So if I press Control Shift Alt M, it matches everything. So going back again, if I hold down space with the shift key and move one, it moves them all. Okay. So on the second one, we're going to do the contrast, and you'll see it again on this one. Curves, add a curve, and increase contrast. She's not going to be happy. Okay, even a medium contrast, there's still an awful lot of saturation, color saturation shift going on there. You can see it a mile off, like, see, right? Now, say if I brought one in from Photoshop, I'm going to go back out again, or sorry, from Camera Raw. I'm going to open this one inside Camera Raw, put some contrast on it in Camera Raw, just to show you that if you do the contrast in Camera Raw, you're fighting the same battle again. So you contrast on 50, and I'm just going to open a copy because I don't want to ruin it. And if I just pop this in here, so what we have now is, the first one is the raw file. The second one is the contrast we put on it inside the Camera Raw. The third one is the bad contrast inside of Photoshop, okay? So the second and third one you can clearly see, but the second one, which was Camera Raw's contrast, we can't undo the saturation on that, at least not easily, and then you're adding an extra step in. So just don't put the contrast on inside the Camera Raw or Lightroom at the start, because Lightroom's the same thing. There might be some sort of a newfangled button, a clever mask or smart mask or whatever to try and, but it's only as good as the programmer that programmed it. And if the programmer next year changes around again, it might mess the look up. Okay, so the third one across is the one we added the standard curve in. So if we change that from normal to luminosity, it gets rid of the color shift. Okay, so you can have your little bit of contrast, and it's still a lot better than that one there, which is baked in inside of Photoshop. Okay, inside of Bridge, sorry, and Camera Raw. So I can close that and say no. All right, now bear with me now, folks, and I get this back now. So on the third one, what we're going to do now is I'm going to do the same thing where we added a curves adjustment layer, and this time we put our 2 points in, and the first one is 25, and then the output we go down to say 20, and on the one that's up here it's 75 and up to 80. So that's a 5% contrast in the highlights by pulling it down here in the highlight section, and a 5% contrast in the shadows by pushing it up. Okay, and that's what we get there. Okay, we have that curve again because we have the color saturation again because we're not doing it properly, but you can get rid of that by going luminosity. All right, so you've got that thing where you're going from, just get rid of that middle one there for a minute, and then just zoom it in. Okay, so the one on the left is the raw file, and the one on the right is the one with the small curve on it. Okay, now it's a very, very small curve. It's only a 5% shift up and down. Okay, and as Justin was saying there, you can actually make an action that does this. I'll show it to you. Hopefully I'll have enough time at the end. I'll show you a little kind of an action you can make. Okay, but here's the thing we're going to get to now, which is the critical point of let me see. Yeah, we'll do this guy. Okay, so we close them without saving anything, and we'll open up just Giraffe. I love Giraffes because they have every skin tone known to man on the planet, and if you're getting a color shift in this, you'll see it in it. Okay, you'll see it a mile off. I'm not too worried about anything here. I might just bring it down a little bit because I'm just looking at the live view there, so I might bring it down probably a half. Bring it down to there. Actually, is that too much? No, that's too much. Bring it down a half stop. Yeah. And click open image. Now, So this is where I just want to show you something, okay? You can also use Camera Raw to give you some contrast, okay? So we could do it this way. This is another way. It's not the way I do it, but it's another way of doing it, okay? You can duplicate the background layer. There's 2 or 3 ways of doing it. You can drag it from the background layer down to the new layer icon. That gives you a new layer. You can press Control or Command J. That gives you a new layer as well. So now on our new layer here, we can go out to Camera Raw, go Filter, Camera Raw Filter. You can do this from with inside of Photoshop CC. You can't do it on a CS6 or before. It doesn't have the option to go into Camera Raw from here. Now, before the latest, I think about a couple of months back, nearly half a year maybe, they brought this texture slider in, which is a lot better than the clarity slider, okay? So if I was to ram the clarity slider up there, it obviously turns it to mush, okay? Because that's 100. But you can do 100 with the clarity slider, and it doesn't really have that much of an adverse effect on it, because it doesn't have that fringing that the smudging out that the clarity does, okay? So if you didn't want to do anything else, you could just go in here and say take it and just ram it up to 100, and then you've gone from no contrast to a bit of contrast, you know? It's very subtle. The texture adds a tiny bit of sharpening as well, okay? It's not so much contrast though, that's the only thing. It's not actually changing the contrast as much. It's just making it's making the image more crisper, okay? So that's one way you could add a tiny bit to it. But if we look at it this way, if you go to the channels palette, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to split. Remember the other curve we had where it was an S curve and it was all in one? It was a little bit of an 5% in the highlights and 5% in the shadows. Okay, it was 5 up the highlights, 5 down the shadows. I'm going to split that now and do 2 separate curves. One's going to be the highlights and one's going to be the shadows. So the trick is this: how do you allow the curve to only happen in the highlights on one curve and in the shadows on another curve? Okay. It's simple to show you, it's more complicated to explain it. So I'll show you first, then I'll explain it. You go to the channels palette. If you can see, if you can't see it, go Window, Channels. And if you just highlight, put your mouse over the RGB channel. See, and if you click on the red, then click on the green, and then click on the blue. That's it's a grayscale representation of the different the 3 channels in every image in Photoshop and on your camera. That's the red, green and blue channels. It's not represented in a color reference, it's a black and white reference. So all you have to do is click on the RGB, hold down Control or Command on a Mac, and you'll get this marquee tool. And if you click, what that has done is that has loaded that RGB channel as a selection. Now here's the thing: when you go to the Add New Adjustment layer and click on Curves, you'll see that a black and white mask is being added. It's not that white mask by default that gets added. It's an actual positive mask, okay? And if we rename that Curves H for highlights, and if we do the same thing again, if we Command or Control click on the RGB channel to load it, and this time we need, if you can look at that mask there and see that where the mask is dark, it's going to protect the shadow area, because it's going to allow the highlights to get brighter but the shadows. So what we need to do is, whenever you're dealing with shadows, you always want an inverted mask. It's a negative mask you want. So we have our positive selection here, but we need to select the negative. We need to invert it. So go into Select, Inverse, and it's inverted the selection. And then if you just add another curve and call it S, Now, if we hold down the Alt or Option key on the PC, that is the shadow mask. So if I'm pushing shadows through that mask, it stands to reason that this area down here is going to get darker, because where a white reveals and shadows hide, okay? So, and that's your mask for the highlights. Now, this is a very basic version of the contrast that I do and I learned to do, and it's so powerful. So, go up to the curve for the shadows. Click as near as you can to the middle. It should be 50-50, okay? So this is the shadows. So what we do here is, if we go up by 5, and then go to the highlights, and click in the middle, and make sure it's 50 and 50. And then if we go down by 10, say, so shift down, and what that has done is it's put in a 10% shift in the highlights and only a 5% shift in the shadows. So if I was to add the two of those layers by holding down the first, say the top layer, click on it and then hold shift and select the two layers and drag them into the folder icon, the group icon, we'll have grouped them, and just call it contrast. Okay, now we can turn that whole folder on or off. So that's before and after, before and after. Okay, and if we want, we can get more highlights by just clicking on the curve, or more shadows, sorry, by just going onto the curve, clicking inside there where it was, and going from 55 up to 60. It's a default set. Every time you do something, try the same thing for a couple of weeks, and you'll get the feedback for how that feels. And then if you want to change something and go from 55 up to 60, or from 45 to 40 for a few weeks, at least when you do it that way and you don't keep constantly changing every single image, all your images then will have the same look and repeatability, which means then that you can mass produce your images, and you can always dodge and burn them afterwards or whatever to add the your touch to them. But this is just the processing beforehand that you need to kind of get all fully automated and not to have to do this, okay? And you can see already, look, switching it on and off, there's no color shift in that. It's just getting darker and brighter. There's no color shift because of the way the masks are there to protect the shadow mask is there to protect the shadows, or sorry, to protect the highlights, and it won't allow stuff. So if you look at where, just above the giraffe's eyelid there, so if we move in and look at the eyelid, and now if we alt click and see the mask is dark there. So that shadow curve that's allowed to happen here and here, it's allowed to happen in there 100%. It's 100% there, and it's less here. It's 50%. It's all there's gradation, and there's perfect harmony between the two, and there's a meld between the two. So you've split your shadow highlight, and you've split your shadows, and you've split the highlight curve. The two of them are now two separate entities, and you can change one and change the other to get the look you like, and it doesn't have that detrimental effect of adding a color imbalance. Okay? And then if you want to be super paranoid about it, you can just click on the two layers and change them both to luminosity. But there is no luminance problem with that because of the way it was created. You see the way there's a very, very, very slight curve, even though it's a 10% shift, and there's a very slight curve here. It's much less of a curve and much less of a color shift because that middle section it's only being pulled down slightly. It's down in a curve like this. It's not going down and then up and then back down again. So there's less of a color shift happening. Okay, any questions on that before we move on? And is the audio still okay? Is there any echo? Thanks, Bob. because there's still a weird echo in the headphones here, which is absolutely driving me insane. But as long as you can't hear it, it's not too bad. Okay. So, what we'll do now is we'll go on. Oh, brilliant. Lovely. Echo's still there, Paul. Right. Tiny echo, but it's grand. Okay, right. I'll sort that out then. Thanks, Lar. Yeah, just now make it next time. You know, if you're off or something, give me a shout. It might figure it out fucking Wednesday evening or something, or Thursday, because I have to get that fixed. Drive me insane. So, anyway, so we'll just change the image now, right? But basically, what you've got now is two small layers going from there to there. Contrast done. You know, and we can make we'll do it now, sure. All right, because the highlight and shadow layers, the curves layers, because they've been given Paul, you show off. Yeah, well, Sennheisers will pick up an echo, all right. Because the layers have been given names, so the highlight layer is called H, and the shadow layer is called S. Then you can make an action that references those layers and changes the actual curve for you, and all you have to do is click a button, and you don't have to go back in and click on this and then try and find the button and all that. So we're going to make the action now, right? That can kind of say give you a 15 or 20 kind of variance in it, okay? So actions palette, okay? You can't see actions palette, go window actions. It's alt or option F9 on a Mac or alt on a keyboard, and you'll see this little play icon will pop out. Now it could be, if you go to the top right hand side, you'll see a flyout menu. Click on it. It might be that yours is in this thing called button mode, which basically means that when you click on it, it acts like a button and it runs the action. You can't make a new action in that mode. So what you have to do is you have to switch that mode off. So you go to the flyout menu and say button mode, and it unchecks it. Look, there's no check mark. So now I have access to the new action set at the bottom. So I can make this and call it contrast contrast action. Okay, so if we were to do this from the start, right, I'm just going to dump the whole folder. So we have our contrast action folder made, and if I go new action now and just call it contrast, now it's recording. You can see the red button. Anything I do now gets recorded. So you have to be very careful of how you do things, okay? So first, what we'll do is we'll load the RGB channel. So control or command click on the red, green and blue channel, and you'll see it says set selection. It's set selection to the RGB channel. So from here, new curves, immediately rename it H, capital H, and click enter. Okay, and control click again the RGB to load it again, and go to select inverse, because for the shadow mask we want an invert, and then go new curves and immediately call it S. Now hold down the shift key, click on the other layer underneath, drag the two of them to the group icon and immediately rename it contrast. Go back to your actions palette and press stop. That's it. Okay, so if I dump the contrast and I go back up and I just click on up to there, now by there all the things that I've just did that it recorded. So I've pressed stop and I'm just going to go back up to where it says contrast. If I click play, it's made it. That was like a tenth of a second, okay? So what we need to do now is we need to actually make the um, the buttons that will go into the highlight and the shadow and change them. Okay, so start off with the background layer, because it needs the button when you press record now, it needs to be seen to be selecting the highlight layer or selecting the shadow layer. Okay, you have to have them selecting it. Okay, so by clicking on the background layer first, it means that we can select the highlight layer. But if you start off before you record the action and you're on the highlight layer, and then you just change the curve, if you run the action the next time and you're on the background layer, it can't see the curve, so it'll get confused. Okay, so make sure your background layer is selected before you click on the next bit. Okay, so the next one then is new action again, and we'll call this H plus 5. Okay, and we want it in contrast action, and press record. So we press record. So now when we select H, it recorded selecting layer H. And if we double click on the curve now and we click in the middle here and we get it to 50-50, and if we just bring it down to 45. Now I said plus 5, so why am I taking away 5? Because we're dealing with the highlights. The highlights is this section down here. It gets brighter the more it goes down. It's because you're taking away ink. We're dealing with ink percentages now inside of the curves dialog box. We're not dealing with light percentages, where if you take away light it gets darker. We're dealing with ink. So you take away the ink and it gets brighter. So we've brought it down by 5. Okay, and then we click stop, and that's it. Okay, all right, so that's H plus 5. So click on the background layer, new action, H plus 10. Make sure we're in contrast action, click record. It's recording now, so we'll record me selecting the H layer, double clicking on it, and going down 10 from the 50. So instead of being at 50, I've went 10 down, which is 40. Okay, because we wanted to we've added 10 in the highlights by making it brighter in the highlights. So 40, and then click stop. Okay, so that's, we have now got H5, H10. So yet again, click on the background again, new H plus 15. Okay, it records. Select the highlights, double click the curve, click on it, 35, because we're going 15 down from the 50. Okay, and select stop. Select the background layer again, click record, H plus 20. It's in the contrast action, click record. Select the H layer, double click it, down to 30. Because we were at 50, we've added 20 in the highlight, so it goes down to 30. So 50 minus the 20 is 30. And go back up to the action and press stop. Okay, now that's the highlights done. 5, 10, 15, 20. Okay, you could go up to 30 if you want, but it's very no bother, Dave, at all. Sure, hopefully during the week, I'm back in work now, so I don't get as much of a chance to kind of do these things. So hopefully during the week or maybe next weekend we'll do another one anyway, all right? So catch up with it anyway, and if you have any questions, give me a shout, all right? So we need to now do the shadow ones. So what we're doing now is click the background layer again, and we're going to add another action. We call it S plus 5, okay? And hit record. Now you see the way it's in signature now? Because I wasn't watching what I was doing. So you have to click stop and just dump that because you don't need it. Alright. Now, when you press your record, your new action here, you have to make sure we're in contrast action. Okay? So shadows plus 5. Record. So now it's recording in here where it should be. It's inside the contrast. So click on the shadows. Put your point in 50 and bring it up to 55. That's 5 more in the shadows from 50 to 55. Because as you go up the curve, it's getting darker. Okay? Go back to your actions palette. Click stop. Select the background because you have to select the background for these kind of things. Then go back again, record new action, S plus 10. Click record, select the shadows, shadow curve, click in there, up to 60. Go back up to your actions palette, press stop. Click on your background. Go back another action again, S plus 15. Click record. Because we're on our background, when we double click on the S curve layer, it records it. And we go up to 65 because that's 15 up. Click on the action, click stop. And one last one, go back to the background again. Click on the action S plus 20. And make sure it's in contrast action and record. Click on the S. Go in, click, and 70. Because obviously 50 plus 20 is 70. Okay? Go back to your actions palette and click stop. Okay? Now that may seem like a lot of work, but by just doing those few little things, and watch this, right? And we also need to put in a neutral one. Okay? So we need to go back and press record, and we call this 0 because it's reset, we call it, because maybe sometimes we want to reset the curve because we might have put in too much and we just got lost and we want to reset it. So we're calling it reset. Make sure it's in the contrast action that we're making, and say we give it a color of, say, green for reset, and click record. So resetting means that if we're on the background and then say we click on the H layer and go in and bring the curve back to 50-50, and then click on the shadow layer and go in and bring the curve back to 50-50, and then click back on the background layer and then go up to actions and click stop. Okay? And I'd normally then, when we've clicked stop there, we can click that reset and drag it up so it's in the middle. Now, here's the cool bit. If I dump that contrast layer and go into the flyout menu and say button mode, I now have a bunch of buttons I can use. So the first one is contrast. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to edit this now. We're going to go back again and we're going to edit the contrast because I want to change the color. It's grey and I don't want it to be grey. So click the flyout menu and go down to action options, and in here you can change the color. So I want, say, the color to be red, and click OK. So now when we go back and click button mode, we now have a contrast that's in red, and then we have highlights and shadows. Okay, so if I just click on the contrast button, it's built the contrast for me there. And say I want 10 in the highlights and 5 in the shadows. Done. You know, and that's as complicated as it needs to be. And if you turn off the contrast layer before and after, there's no color shift. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, now that's the basic contrast that I do, where you're only loading the RGB channel as a grayscale, which protects the curve. Okay, it's not the higher end stuff, but it's you know, if you want the higher end stuff, send me an email, ltphotoshop@yahoo.com, and we can arrange one-on-one sessions on, you know, I can do them online as well, but that's it's basically how how I buy all this gear. Anyway, so if we look at this shot now of her again, we just open her up. This is one more thing I want to show you before we head off this evening. Well, there's one more thing after this. We just want to show you that it works on a human as well as on a giraffe, and it also works on the landscape. So open her up, happy days there. And instead of having to manually rebuild all of those things, all you do is click on contrast, and it's built the contrast layers there. And then say if I want, say, 5 in the highlights, 10 in the shadows. I'd say 5 in the shadows, 10 in the highlights. Okay? So I'm just looking at the screen here, right? So if we duplicate that and V and M and go back to the first one and reset it. So the first one on that side, yeah. So the first one has no contrast. And that's roughly 50% there, okay? And the one on the right hand side has the contrast. And if you have this thing where you do the contrast all the time, and I'll just pull this out for a split second here, and you can go 5, 10, 15, 20. You see the way the contrast isn't the highlight contrast is not allowing the contrast to get brighter in the black part of the eye. Okay, that's because of that protection mask. If I was to shift click on that and turn it off, the whole image gets brighter and you lose the three-dimensionality of the whole thing. So left click on the mask again, switch it back on. Alright, and that's a huge pop-up there, even 15%, and then say 10% in the shadow, 5% in the shadows. So I've got a 5% shadow and 15% highlight. And if you look at it, just bring that back to there, there's no color issue. It's just brighter and more punchier. Okay, apply to all. And then if we got, say, this shot here, happy enough with the way that is, that's fine. Just open the image. So simple enough, hit contrast. It builds the two things we needed. And then in this image here, say 10 in the highlights, 10 in the shadows. And if you want to reset it, you click reset, and it sets both curves back on 0. So say 10 and 10. Okay? So if you had, and I just turned the contrast on and off, like, that's really cool. Okay? So say you had images that you wanted to always do 10 and 10 on. You could actually make another action that does that by default. And I'll show you how to do that, okay? So if we reset it, So we're back on 0 and 0. And we go back into the actions flyout and switch the button mode off. So we need to now, we're going to make an action that's going to say 10s and 10 shadows, or 10s and 10 highlights, okay? So, but we need to do it from an image as it just came in. So what we need to do is this. Record a new action. We call it 10 shadows 10 H10, okay? And it's inside the contrast action. Record that. Now here's the cool thing. When you're doing this, all you have to do is, if you click on the contrast one at the top and click play, it records the fact that we played the action contrast, and it put the 2 layers in that we needed. Okay, so then we want 10 shadows. So if we click on the shadow plus 10 and we click play, and then we click on the highlight plus 10 and we click play, and the last thing then will be to select the back layer rather than the background. So because sometimes if you bring a smart object in, now this is the only thing, don't try and replicate what I, well, you can replicate what I did, but wherever I just selected the background, if I was selecting the background in the middle of the action, which I don't think I did, because I know for a fact that sometimes if the background isn't called background, the action will stop working, right? So you have to do what's called selecting the background layer. So to select the background layer, if you hold down Alt or Option on a Mac and hold down the comma key, it's select back layer. So it doesn't matter whether your bottom layer is called background, whether it's called layer 0, whether it's called comp 1, whatever, it will just go down to the bottom layer. Okay, and then we click on stop. All right, so once we have that action made, we can just dump the contrast folder again. So button mode. So now all I have to do is click on shadows 10 H10 and it's done. Before, after. Any questions on that? Is everybody still alive? Or not? Like, is everybody still awake? Thanks, Lar. It's one of these mad things in the days we live in, and yet you kind of think you're talking to yourself, you know. And it's nice to see people typing back. So that's just a very, it's a basic thing of what I do, where it gets way more powerful and way more into it, right? But there is like, it took me like less than 5, and I was telling you what I was doing. So if you're creating it yourself, once you get used to it, you could do this thing in like less than a minute. You know, it's just you need to kind of step it and step it and step it. But I can open up another image now. I can open up the image of her and the nighttime scene. And obviously, because we have an action now, we can also make a droplet out of it, which is what I covered in a video a couple of weeks back. And all I have to do is, oh god, I only opened up the one image, didn't I? All you have to do is make the droplet, and you drag all your images onto the droplet. And once you build in a save as option into the action, it will automatically run the action, save the image, close it, and close down obviously as well, and you don't even have to do anything with your images. You can get the same amount of contrast and look to every single image. So there's the first one there. So if we close that one, and if we do the tile all vertically and match all, and if we just hit, we're over on this one here, if we just hit S10 H10 for 10 and 10, happy days. I don't like there's a little bit for me, a little bit too much shadow. So all I have to do is hit S plus 5. Boom. Done with that image. Save it, close it. Over on this one, 1010. Like that. Happy out. Save it, close it. And there's no color shift. Alright. So the last one I wanted to go through was this one. Let's see, orangutan. It was up. It's from the old camera about 2 years ago, I think. At this stage, I took it up in Dublin Zoo. I think it was ISO. It was ISO 800. So I'm not really worried about the graining at the minute. I don't. I can do an episode on dealing with grain and stuff like that. The noise. But that's the image as it came in, right? But what I want to do now is I want to use camera raw to get more detail in the shadows, so that the action has more to grip, okay? Because at the minute you've got this incredibly compressed shadow area, because remember that curve I was showing you earlier on from the camera manufacturers? Where's it gone? That one. They put this incredible amount of compression in the shadow area of the curve, okay? Of your camera. So to get around that, what I would do is, in this case, I'm not going to worry about going back to the other process that I would normally do. I'm just going to show you what I do in this case. So if you got into the shadows, just clicked in there. I don't wang slide bars. It drives me insane because I have no repeatability. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying I might, like, there's 90, 97. Like, just click it in there and go shift up and have a set amount. So in this case, I'd bring it in nearly to the 100, maybe 90. I just want more details back here, okay, underneath, because I can always darken it. I want this as flat as I can. And the highlights, then I just drag them across for the split. So highlights that way, that's grand. And then the whites, I'm looking for the best option. See, the whites is auto compression, which is rubbish anyway. So I'm just going to go into the whites and bring them down a little bit. I'm looking at the actual broadcast screen now. So I'm going to have to go into the whites and bring them down a good bit, actually. Alright, there's still a tiny bit of compression blowing out there, but we won't worry about it. So if I open that image up, okay, and we get our little action, and click 10 and 10. It's done, right? So before and after. So the 10 in my case is too much because I want to keep some of the shadows, right? So I'll go back to 5. Now, if we zoom in here, this is the thing I wanted to show you. If we turn off the highlight one and turn it back on, okay, I want to put more highlights in, but if I put more highlight in, it's at 10 at the minute. If I go up to 15 in the highlights, which is basically going into the curve and pulling it down till it says 35, okay, 35 is 15 from 50. So the problem is I've got a blown out area here now, okay? So the handiest way to fix that is to use what's called blend if. So on the offending curves layer here, the highlight layer, if we move over to the right hand side and double click over here, it brings up this curves dialog box, okay? Now I did a blend if, I think it was, when was it? 3 episodes ago. It was all about blend if. But basically what I want to do is this layer here, and this is the underlying layer. So that corresponds to down here. This layer represents the layer that I'm physically on, and the underlying layer is the layer underneath it. Okay, so I'm on this layer at the minute. So if I put a hole in the highlights, if I grab the highlight slider and bring it back, watch what happens to the orangutans. That was the whole way back, sorry. Now watch what happens. The highlight, it just goes away, but it goes away, it's by dragging the slider without splitting it from I've made a hole in the highlights now, and all I'm looking at in the highlight area of the whole image is the one that was underneath where there was no highlight because it's the background layer. By making that hole up here, I'm actually looking at the highlights from the background layer which weren't blown out. Okay, but I don't want this either on or off. I want to filter it. So by holding Alt or Option and left clicking, I can now filter it down and bring this down. So by clicking on preview, that's before and that's after. Okay, and click OK. So now when I move out, because I've actually put a blending mode on and actually basically cut a perfect hole in the mask in that layer so that it will not affect when it goes up and up and up into the highlights. It just filters off to nothing. Okay, so if I double click over here again, everything from 200 up to 255 it will be invisible on this highlight layer, and everything between 149 and 200 will be gradually going down to nothing, and then from 148 backwards it's 100% of whatever is going on in the layer. So now I can actually afford to go in and click the play button and say give me 15 highlights and say hang on, give me 15 highlights and 20 highlights. Yep. So I can get 20 highlights now, and it actually hasn't blown out the side of the orangutan. Okay, so that's more or less me for tonight, apart from the issue at the start. So what I might do is I might compress, download this and re-upload it without the faffing at the start, because I didn't know it was going to be a bad echo or anything like that. So any questions before I say good night tonight? Because there's no problem answering questions. No water spot. Well, hopefully it will make a bit of sense when you come to actually doing it. And thanks, Justin. No bothers at all there. Hopefully you'll see it on the next one. I'll give everyone thing on Facebook anyway. So if anyone wants to join in, they can, and we'll just take it from there. So anyone that came in, thanks for joining in, and anyone that's catching up on YouTube itself, hi and goodbye.